Nomit is particularly delighted to introduce you to Professor Anthony Forsyth, who I'm inviting over the stage, which is not a stage. So Anthony speaks wonderful Italian, but he's here. He's a professor at employment law at RMIT, and he's not going to talk about workers' issues in Italian, are you?
Penso di no. Ma
Yes.
uso questo? Sì. Grazie Dario.
Okay.
Primo vorrei dire che sono molto grato a Giovanni, Luca e tutti gli altri per l'opportunità di presentare a voi oggi. Quello è tutto per il mio italiano di scuola di molti anni fa. Continuo adesso in inglese. Grazie. So I'm going to speak to you about the inquiry that I conducted for the Victorian Government into labour hire and insecure work 2 years ago, which was one of many recent investigations into the exploitation of vulnerable workers in Australia. Unfortunately, this is a long-standing problem in Australia, but one which thankfully is getting much greater attention from the media and the broader community now. So we're all familiar, I think, with the scandals, widespread underpayments across 7-Eleven franchises, Caltex petrol outlets and Domino's pizza stores, which have come to light in the last few years and exposed the unlawful practices of big brands to much needed scrutiny. We know underpayment is also a very big problem in small businesses. I've often wondered how much the cool young Italians are being paid at some of my favourite Melbourne cafes. Jess can probably tell us a bit about that shortly. In fact, the Fair Work Ombudsman, the agency responsible for enforcing our employment laws, did an inspection blitz of Lygon Street and Brunswick Street cafes last year after they had received intelligence suggesting a culture of paying less than the minimum wage and failure to keep employment records. So we know that this is happening in those kind of businesses. The work I did, the inquiry for the Victorian Government, focused on non-compliance with our workplace laws by third-party labour hire providers, or what you might commonly understand as labour hire agencies. So I'll just briefly tell you a bit about the nature of that problem, why exploitation occurs in the context of third-party provision of labour, what the inquiry recommended and what the Victorian Government is now doing in response to those issues. And this is something that's also having a regulatory impact in 2 other states at the moment as well. So to tell you about the problem, labour hire arrangements usually involve what you call a triangular or 3-party relationship, where a labour hire agency supplies a worker to a third party, which we call the host, in exchange for a fee. So there's no direct employment relationship between the worker and the host or the business that they go to work in, because they're employed by the agency. And it's the agency that's responsible for ensuring that those workers are paid the award rates of pay and other minimum conditions that they should expect to enjoy. Now that generally works fine where the labour hire agency is one of the many big, large, well-established, some of them are multinational companies that operate in that sector. But what we've seen in recent years that's impacted on sectors like horticulture, where a lot of overseas workers are employed, is the emergence of less reputable labour hire contractors. So we wouldn't even really call them agencies, we'd just call them people who are providing that service to someone else, and often not even operating as a legitimate business of their own. Some of these operators use technology to shield themselves from identity, so they may only have, in terms of running that so-called business, a mobile phone. They might use internet ads on something like Gumtree to lure young workers in, and they don't have any physical place of business or way of tracking them down. So it enables these kind of operators to engage in breaches of workplace laws with very little prospect of being pursued by the Fair Work Ombudsman or other agencies like the Tax Office, which obviously polices taxation payments but also superannuation entitlements of workers. So that's the nature of the problem. The inquiry that I was involved in 2015 and 16, we took written submissions. We invited submissions from the public. We received over 700 of those. We held hearings all around the state and in the city, and over around 15 hearing days, I heard from 200 witnesses. So just to give you a snapshot of what the kinds of things we found were happening just in the horticulture sector. So the three most problematic areas where this was occurring, and probably still is to some extent, were in horticulture, in the cleaning industry, and also in meat processing plants in mostly regional areas. But labour hire of the kind I've described is used quite extensively in the process of picking and packing fresh fruit and vegetables in our state and across Australia, really. And mostly it's because it's seasonal work. So the businesses that are running or operating those businesses, providing fresh produce to the supermarkets, for example, they don't really want to have large numbers of people on their books or their workforce. They want to be able to get that labour sourced through someone else because they only need it for a short period of time, usually. So the sector is really heavily reliant on international students and backpackers. Also, our working holiday visa scheme is specifically designed to provide that transient labour force. So overseas backpackers can get a second year on their visa if they perform certain types of work for 88 days in a regional area in the first year. And in 2015, around 15,000 Italians were working in Australia on that kind of visa. Some of the breaches I heard about, just to give you a few examples, backpackers and international students working on farms around Mildura, so this is up in the northwest of the state, fruit and wine production, told me they were paid around $7 to $9 less than the award rate of pay per hour. So the casual award rate at the time was about $21 per hour, getting $7 to $9 less than that. It was common that rest breaks and basic safety standards were not complied with. So you have people working particularly over the summer months, long hours in hot conditions, sometimes without water, drinking water, dangerous transportation to and from farms in unsafe vehicles, and also substandard accommodation. Accommodation is a big problem. There are many reputable hostel operators who assist people to find work, but I also heard a lot of evidence about accommodation linked to the provision of work, so you have to stay with this operator in order to get the opportunity to do the work. So the worker has no other option, and where the accommodation is, quite frankly, appalling. I heard evidence about what were called doss houses in Sales, so Sales in the eastern part of Victoria, in Gippsland. So accommodation run by a labour contractor to a business called Covino Farms, which is a major supplier to the supermarkets, where it was said that there were 15 to 20 people living in a house stacked in like rabbits in a burrow, all paying $100 a week rent. Union officials provided the inquiry a collection of advertisements for work at below award rates translated from foreign language publications. So you have people openly advertising that work is available for significantly less than the award rate of pay. At the Mildura hearing, again up in the northwest of Victoria, a young woman from Hong Kong talked about her experience and that of a friend of hers working for contractors on a vegetable farm near Robinvale, near Mildura, for 60 to 70 hours per week. That workplace was unsafe. Both women suffered injuries, but did not receive workers' compensation entitlements. And that woman, the young woman giving evidence, and this has really stayed with me since the time, she described Robinvale as one part of dark in Australia, just like the dark, many, many bad things there. So that gives you an idea of the kind of things that are going on right before our eyes. And it is one positive thing, I think, is that we are hearing a lot more about this. As I said earlier, it's been going on for a long time, but there is more scrutiny of it and adverse publicity for some of the businesses that do this. Just quickly, I'll tell you that in terms of what we do about this problem, my inquiry looked at how labour hire is regulated in a number of other countries, including Italy. And what's very striking when you compare the Australian system is that there are very few barriers to entry for these kind of businesses. There's not much in the way of stopping someone from being able to operate in the kind of way I've been talking about. So the main recommendation of the inquiry was to introduce a licensing scheme that will require labour hire providers in Victoria to meet quite strict standards before they can obtain a licence to operate. Those standards aim to ensure that the provider is a legitimate business, that it complies with workplace and safety laws and accommodation standards. And that recommendation has been adopted in legislation that's now before the Victorian Parliament. It's waiting to be considered in the upper house of Parliament. That bill imposes penalties of up to $500,000 for operating without a licence or for anyone who uses an unlicensed provider. And similar laws are already in place in Queensland and South Australia. Clearly, it would be better if those laws applied across Australia, and the Federal Labor Party has a policy to introduce a national labour hire licensing scheme if they win the next election. So for Italian students and backpackers working in Australia, these laws will mean there is less chance that they will be exposed to exploitation by what I've called dodgy labour hire operators. And there will also be a Victorian Government agency that complaints about unscrupulous operators can be brought to. So I do really hope that that bill is passed by Parliament very soon. To finish, I have spoken about many problems in terms of how migrant workers are treated in Australia, and I think the other speakers are going to tell you about some more. But I also do think there is some reason for optimism. It does feel to me like the tide is turning. In many ways, there is a backlash forming against mistreatment of the vulnerable, and the media's association of major brands with exploitation in their supply chain is producing greater awareness among consumers, and many people are choosing to support only those businesses that respect their workers and obey the law. Events like this, organised by NOMIT and other community groups, play an important role in highlighting the issues and directing migrant workers to available support services. And I'm sure also that many of you here have positive experiences of living and working in Australia, which I hope will continue. Allora ancora grazie mille per l'onore di parlare stasera e buona fortuna per tutto il lavoro di NOMIT in futuro. Grazie.
Thank you very much, Anthony Forsyth, Professor of Employment Law at MRT. Thanks for the picture that you brought. If I got it right.